On October 27, 1989, in Bay Village, Ohio, 10-year-old Amy Mihaljevic got up just after 6 a.m. and started getting ready for school. She rode her bike to school that morning. After all, Bay Village was a safe town. So safe that Cleveland Magazine called it one of the safest places on Earth. With just more than 2 months to go in 1989, there had been exactly 0 murders, 0 abductions, and 0 kidnappings in Bay Village that year. Cleveland Magazine went on to say, there had never been a child homicide in the city's history. The police are proficient. The citizens are responsible and community-minded. Bay Village is how modern civilization is supposed to be, tranquil and secure. It was a warmer than normal day. It would not be long before the long, cold, Midwestern winter would arrive.
As expected, Amy hopped on her bicycle and rode safely to Bay Village Middle School that morning. After school, she walked right past her bike and caught up with some other girls she knew, including a girl by the name of Olivia Maziak. She asked Olivia if she could walk with her. Olivia responded, quote, "You never walk this way," end quote. To which Amy responded, quote, "I'm meeting someone. I'm meeting a friend," end quote. One of Amy's classmates by the name of Haley Pritchard was walking behind Amy as they came into the shopping plaza. She saw Amy run to a black van as if she recognized it.
Just as quickly as she got up to the black van, she turned away and walked away from it and ended up right where we're standing right here. At the time, this was a Baskin-Robbins establishment. Amy stood out here. She did not enter the establishment. She was playing around on a pole, perhaps this one right here, spinning around it, and she was looking at the ground as if she was deep in thought. A few minutes later, a well-dressed man wearing a beige jacket walked up, leaned towards Amy and whispered something in her ear. Then he put his arm around her and they walked off together. Amy's friends figured that was her father. It was not her father. Amy was never seen alive again. This is Twisted Crimes.
According to an article in People magazine, a couple of weeks before Amy met the man at the Baskin-Robbins, she had heard the phone ring at her house and she had answered it. She was home alone at the time. The man on the other end of the line told her that her mother had just gotten a promotion at work and that he wanted to buy a gift for her. He said he could use Amy's help picking out the perfect gift. He told her that they would have $45 to spend on the gift. To sweeten the pot a bit, he also told Amy that she could keep any money left over after they bought the gift for her mom. She would be free to buy something for herself or to just take the cash.
We should point out here that Amy's mother, Margaret Mihaljevic, who was working for a paper called Trading Times, selling ads for cars, did not actually get a promotion at work at that time. However, she had recently gone from working part-time to working full-time for the paper. So, perhaps Amy was fooled by this, thinking the man was right that her mom had gotten a promotion.
The man told Amy it needed to be their little secret. He told her she could not tell anyone about it or it would ruin the surprise for her mother. The man then told Amy to meet him right after school on Friday, October 27, 1989, at the Bay Square Shopping Center. Amy did not tell her parents about this meeting. However, she did tell some of her friends at school about it. She was excited about this opportunity to surprise her mom. Amy was apparently not the only little girl this man had called around that time. We'll go into more detail about other phone calls he may have made in just a bit.
As we go through the next part of the timeline, we will be using information gathered in James Renner's book about this case called Amy, My Search for Her Killer. According to the book, when Amy was getting ready for school that morning, she grabbed green pants and a pale green sweatshirt with lavender trim that morning. She put on her favorite earrings, which were tiny blue turquoise silhouettes of a horse's head, mounted on gold metallic studs. She grabbed her black riding boots with laces up the front and put them on. Then she reached for her blue denim book bag and threw it over her shoulders. Since it was still a bit chilly in those early morning hours, she also grabbed a white windbreaker as she ran out the door. She jumped on her bike and rode down the street a bit, where she met up with her friends, Kristen and Katie. The three of them pedaled to the middle school.
The bell rang, signaling the start of a new school day at 7:50 that morning. At some point during the day, the students in Amy's class heard a talk from Officer Mark Spetzel about stranger danger. There's a bit of confusion as to whether this talk took place at the high school or at the middle school that day, but we do know Amy was present for the talk. If only Officer Spetzel knew, one of the students he was talking to that day had a meeting set up with a stranger that very afternoon. It's something he's thought about many times in the years since.
At lunchtime, Amy enjoyed spaghetti at the school cafeteria. At 2:10 p.m., the bell rang, signifying the end of another school day. That's when Amy began her walk to the Bay Village Square Shopping Center.
Sometime around 2:30 that afternoon, a police officer drove into the shopping center. He noticed a group of older kids hanging out. He knew they should have been still in school, since the high school had not let out for the day yet. He went over to talk to the boys and lectured them about how they should not skip school. One of the boys, Dan Monnet, would later say he was nervous about looking the cop in the eyes, so he was looking over the cop's shoulder and he noticed Amy swinging on the pole outside the Baskin-Robbins. Jim Kapusinski was working at his barbershop that day, just a short walk away from where Amy was. Business was slow that day. He had no customers at the time, so he walked outside sometime around 2:30 as well. He said there were only 5 vehicles parked in the entire Bay Center parking lot at the time. He figured most of them belonged to workers at the other businesses in the center. He noticed the older teens skipping class and watched them for a moment before heading back inside. Rick Burns was the owner of Burns Auto Service at the time. It was located behind the Baskin-Robbins. He sold his business to Vivid Jewelers at the end of 2016. Rick started working here in 1986 when his father Rich, a master mechanic, was the owner of the business. Rick told the Village newspaper, quote, "It was great to work and learn how to fix cars for my dad. Not many people get to work with their father. It was an honor. He taught me to show up every day and work hard. I try to pass down that tradition to our employees and new mechanics," end quote. He said his dad ran a full-service station at the time. He said, quote, "In 1986, gas was 79 cents a gallon. We offered full service at the pumps. We would fill your tank with gas, wash your windows, and check under the hood. If you were down a quart of oil, we would put it in for you. After your tank was full, we would also check the air in your tires," end quote. He eventually took over from his dad and took out the gas pumps so he could concentrate on fixing cars. According to Cleveland Scene, on the day Amy was abducted, Rick showed up at work driving a truck he had just finished restoring. He wanted to show it off to his friends and employees. At the time, the building ended here. This area was later added by Vivid Jewelers. There was a large alley here at the time, with plenty of room for several cars to park. Rick said when he got here that day, there was a brownish gold GM sedan parked in one of the spots in the alley that he often used to park his own vehicle. He would later say he was a bit upset about it because that was where he was planning to park his restored truck that day. He quickly parked in a different spot and did not think much else about it. Since there were so few people at the Bay Square Shopping Center that day, only 2 people actually witnessed the abduction, and they were both kids at the time. One was a 5th grade boy by the name of Julius Holonek. He also saw Amy spinning around the pole. We don't know what exactly he saw or where he was standing when the man walked away with Amy, because Julius has not spoken about the case to reporters. He has ignored many requests for interviews through the years. He now, according to Facebook, lives in Georgia with his wife and kids.
The other eyewitness was a girl by the name of Maddie. She said she heard Julius yell out, "Amy!" She said the way he said it seemed like a taunt to her, so she watched to see what he was up to. That was when she saw the well-dressed man walk up to Amy, put his arm around her, and walk away with her. She had never met Amy's dad, so that is who she assumed the man was. Shortly after that, Rick Burns was standing by the pumps at his gas station when he saw the car he had seen parked in the alley earlier come driving toward him. The car stopped next to him, and Rick said there was a man with shaggy hair driving the car, and there was a young girl in the back seat. He said the man asked for directions to I-480 and then drove away. He said he didn't even think anything of it. He just assumed it was a man going for a ride with his daughter. As the car drove away, he didn't even bother looking at the license plate. He felt horrible about not looking at the license plate, and he said in the years to come that he started memorizing license plates all of the time. It should be pointed out here that according to WKYC3 News, Rick never mentioned the potential suspect vehicle when he was first interviewed about the case in 1989. He brought it up to them years later. It was hard with all of the witnesses at the time because this man had not given people any reason to pay close attention to him. According to at least one of the witnesses, the man had said Amy's name when he walked up to her, and Amy had seemed happy to see him. And all of the witnesses just assumed the man was her father, so they did not really pay close attention to the man. And why would they?
The man was described as about 5 feet 8 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. He had dark hair and perhaps had a bald spot on top of his head. One of the two kids who saw him said he had on large round glasses, but the other kid said he did not have glasses on. Police created a sketch based on what the kids thought they had seen. According to the True Crime Garage podcast, Amy's older brother Jason, who was in the 7th grade at the time, said he was actually heading to the shopping plaza that day. He said he did not know Amy was going there as well. He was just wanting to go because a lot of the other kids from his school went there to hang out in the afternoons. As he was walking to the shopping plaza, he saw some older boys who he said were bullies who liked to pick on him and other kids. When he saw them, he decided to head home instead of walking to the shopping plaza. He has beat himself up over that decision through the years, feeling that he may have stopped the whole thing from happening if he would have just kept walking to the plaza. But there was no way for him to know that at the time. He said, quote, "If I had maybe been there, could I have changed the situation? One of those questions you'll never be able to answer, but still races through your mind," end quote. When he got home, a little after 3:10 that afternoon, he placed a phone call to his mom, Margaret, at work. Margaret had a rule that her kids needed to check in with her on the phone when they got home each day. Jason told her he was home safe, but he said Amy, for some reason, had not gotten home yet.
Margaret told him not to worry. She said, quote, "She had mentioned something to me about trying out for the choral group. So I told Jason to call back in a little while. I told him not to worry," end quote. However, Margaret was worried. She said, quote, "It was a feeling, a very bad feeling," end quote. Then, according to Cleveland magazine, about 20 minutes later at 3:30, Margaret's phone rang again. It was Jason telling her Amy was still not home. So at that point, she started gathering her things and getting ready to go home. However, just a few minutes later, her phone rang again. This time it was Amy. Margaret sat back down at her desk. Amy told her she was fine. Margaret would later say Amy had seemed rushed during the phone call. According to Cleveland magazine, she said, quote, "She answered my questions with a word, yes, okay, fine. That wasn't like her. She was a little chatterbox," end quote. She asked Amy if she had stayed after for choir, but Amy told her the choir met on Wednesday and Thursday. Margaret responded, quote, "Wait a minute, this is Friday. Why were you there?" End quote. Amy did not respond, so Margaret said, quote, "Is this some kind of an audition or something?" End quote. To which Amy responded, quote, "Yeah, it was for the new people," end quote. She quickly began to feel that intuition that it seems only mothers have. She felt something was wrong, so she did end up deciding to leave work early, and she drove home. When she got home, Jason told her Amy was still not home. Obviously, this was bad news. Amy had called her and lied to her, saying she was at home. Why would Amy do this?
Amy's father, Mark Mihaljevic, said, quote, for Amy not to tell the truth. That was totally out of character for Amy. End quote. At 4:30, Margaret ran back to her car outside and made the quick drive over to the middle school. When she got to the school, she noticed there were no cars in the parking lot. No one was here. The doors were locked. Then she noticed a lone bicycle parked in the bike rack outside the school. It was Amy's bike.
She said, quote, "I knew right then it was something terrible. Disaster. I never said it, but that bike? I was sick. I was shaking. I knew something terrible had happened to Amy." End quote. She got back in her car and drove straight to the Bay City Police Department, which, at that time, was located directly across the street from the Bay Square Shopping Center at the City Hall building. Often police will decide to wait a bit before they start searching for a missing person, but that did not happen in this case. It was immediately classified as a child abduction, and the police began a massive search for Amy.
It was quickly announced on the news. Bay Village police are seeking a little girl who failed to return home from school late this afternoon. Then, just a few minutes later, another announcement. 10-year-old Amy Renee Mihaljevic was reported missing by her mother late this afternoon. Bay Village police are searching the area surrounding her Lentford Drive home and Bay Square Shopping Center, where she was last seen at approximately 3 p.m., wearing a pale green sweatsuit with lavender trim. She is 4'10", 90 pounds, with straight blonde hair and brown eyes. Mark Mihaljevic was a customer service representative for General Motors at the time. He got home sometime between 6 and 6:30 that evening. He had no idea Amy was missing. He said when he walked into the door of their home, quote, "They told me she was just missing. The police were there, and I went all over the house with them from top to bottom." End quote. Friends of the family showed up and then, quote, "We searched the ravine, the one that runs through to the lake. We walked the whole thing, every inch, calling her name. Amy, Amy," end quote. By 9 that night, the police station was a command post. People who lived in the village were stopping by with food, flashlights, and other supplies. People were calling the police station, offering their vehicles and dogs to help with the search, and even offering their boats so police could search lakes in the area.
Jean Sabo was the mother of Amy's best friend at the time. She looked through the yearbook and found Amy's 1989 school picture. She took it to Channel 3 News, and on the 11 o'clock news that evening, this picture was shown. According to Cleveland Scene, Amy hated the picture and actually had gotten a brand new picture taken that day at school because it had been picture retake day. She despised the ponytail and wanted to wear her hair down for her new picture. There were no cell phones back then, so that night, Margaret laid down on the floor below the phone they had mounted on the wall, waiting for a call, telling her Amy was okay. Since kidnapping is a federal offense, the police contacted the FBI. By early the next morning, FBI agents had arrived and assisted the police in the search for Amy. Sometime early that Saturday morning, police officers were canvassing Amy's neighborhood and talking to all of her neighbors.
One of the neighbors told them his daughter was a good friend of Amy's. He said his daughter told him Amy had talked about getting a phone call, maybe even several phone calls from a man. Amy had told her she was going to meet the man here and then leave with him to go shopping at a bigger mall where they would pick out the perfect gift for her mom. The girl also said Amy told her that she had overheard her parents talking about a divorce and she'd been fighting some with her mom. Amy thought maybe the special gift would make everything better at home. Police now knew they were not dealing with a man who had just grabbed Amy as a crime of opportunity. This was a man who had carefully planned out his evil scheme in advance. Not only that, but he had set up the meeting spot with Amy to be directly across the street from the police station, in a public place where he knew he would be seen by witnesses. It was almost like he was taunting the police.
Police immediately checked phone records. But back in 1989, only long-distance phone calls were tracked by phone companies. So police now knew the man had a local number, but had no idea what that number was. By the end of that first weekend, volunteers were making thousands of copies of Amy's picture as well as the composite sketch. A local printing company quickly got involved. The owner of the company refused to allow the name of the business to be released. The company ended up making about 2 million flyers and giving away every one of them for free. On Saturday afternoon, FBI agents took search dogs and headed to Holly Hill Farms, which was located where this neighborhood is now. Holly Hill Farms was a place Amy had been going to once a week for horseback riding lessons for the past 2 years. In the month prior to her abduction, she had been coming here almost every day to ride horses. Police spent several days here searching for Amy. They even brought in airplanes with heat-sensing equipment to fly over the fields and wooded areas.
According to Cleveland Scene, the owner of Holly Hill Farms had a son by the name of Harold Bound, who people often called HB. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he was a paranoid schizophrenic. He lived in a small apartment located over a garage on the property. He spent time cleaning out the stables. He loved guns, and he had a gun collection as well as other weapons in his room.
Some of the girls who rode horses with Amy at the farm said HB used to walk through the fields on the property carrying a bow and wearing camouflage. Shannon Conway rode horses at the farm at the time. She said, quote, "All of us girls thought he was really creepy. He would wander around the barn sometimes. Every girl at the barn assumed HB did it," end quote.
HB's brother Greg said he saw HB coming back to the farm late on the night Amy was abducted. Then, about a week after Amy was taken, HB headed to the Veterans Administration Hospital in Brecksville and checked himself into the mental ward. He told them he was having bouts of uncontrollable violence. Officer Spetzel, the one who had talked to Amy's class about stranger danger, later became Detective Spetzel and worked on Amy's case. Then after that, he became Chief Spetzel when he became Chief of Police of Bay Village. According to Cleveland Scene, he said, quote, "Was Harold Bound a suspect? Yes. Was he ever ruled out? No, I don't think so. He did take lie detector tests and probably failed them. But barring any new evidence, there's nothing that could lead to an arrest," end quote. Over the next few weeks, police talked to family members, neighbors, friends, and any potential suspect who popped up. A huge group of volunteers had come together to help in any way they could. They called themselves Amy's Army. A longtime resident of Bay Village by the name of Howard Kimball volunteered to lead Amy's Army. He said, quote, "A printing company donated all the print work and insisted we never mention their name. The airlines, the TV stations, restaurants, we asked for paper, and so much came in one day we had to move it to the fire station. People were so good, so amazing," end quote. But still, no one knew where Amy was. Halloween was just 4 days after Amy was taken. Kids were not allowed to go trick-or-treating that day on Linford Road where Amy had lived. Instead, parents walked around the neighborhood with bags of candy and passed them through half-open doors to the children waiting inside. Amy's brother Jason said he was put on lockdown. He said, quote, "I figured my parents had enough on their plate, so I sort of went in the background. I'd go in the basement and build like model cars or take the dog out for a walk to the lake, just trying not to be in the house and be in their way, because I couldn't call people. I couldn't go drive someplace," end quote.
Amy's 11th birthday was on December 11th of that year. On that day, every church that had a bell in Bay Village rang the bells in unison at 7 p.m. Some of her classmates planted a tree at her school for a birthday present. They were hoping she would come home soon and be able to enjoy it. At the Mihaljevic house, Margaret threw a party for Amy and invited a few people. They brought gifts for Amy. Margaret said in a TV interview that day, quote, "Oh, happy birthday. We miss you. Come home. It's very difficult to have a birthday party without the birthday girl. End quote.
Mark had been working hard to try to find his daughter, but on her birthday, he pretty much gave up. He said to Crime Stoppers, quote, "I just realized in my heart that I would probably never see her again." End quote.
As police continued to investigate, 20 other girls came forward saying they had gotten weird calls from an unknown male caller. Police figured out that at least 3 of those calls were from the same man who called Amy. The calls happened earlier in 1989.
On the morning of Thursday, February 8th, 1990, Janet Seabold was alone, enjoying her morning jog along this desolate road called County Road 1181 near Ruggles Township, Ohio, about 50 miles from Bay Village. Somewhere in this area here, about 12 to 20 feet off the road, in the field, she noticed a small figure laying face down in the weeds. At first, she thought it was a doll, but when she got closer, she realized it was a body. She ran to the nearest farmhouse and started banging on the door. The 911 call was answered at 7:30 a.m. Police quickly arrived, blocked off the road, and secured the scene. Then they waited for the FBI. Her teeth had fallen out and were in the ground below her. The FBI agents knew right away it was Amy. She was still wearing the same clothes she had on when she was abducted. It had been 104 days since she was taken. The autopsy concluded she had eaten at least one meal with the man who murdered her. It seems that for a while after abducting her, the man had played it off that they actually were going to go look for a present for her mom. That's why she was able to calmly call her mom and tell her everything was fine. The autopsy also determined she may have been alive for up to a few days after she was taken. She had died after being hit in the head and stabbed at least 3 times in the neck. Police believed her clothing had been removed and then put back on at some point. Her black boots and a leather black Buick binder with the words "Best in Class" on it that her father had gotten at work were missing. According to James Renner, one of her horse's head earrings was found near her. The other has never been found. Perhaps the killer kept these things as souvenirs.
According to Cleveland Scene, when her good friend Kristen Sabo heard about the news from her mom, she was silent. She then walked into her bedroom where she started throwing toys and other things against the wall, ripping up pictures and basically destroying her room. She screamed out, quote, "Amy, how could you be so stupid?" End quote. But clearly Kristen was wrong about that. Amy was not stupid. She was just young, and she clearly did not understand how much evil there was in the world. She was trying to shine some light into the world to make her mom happy, and she was willing to take a risk to do that. Amy was buried in a plot her parents had purchased for themselves in Wisconsin, where they had met. Police were trying to figure out how the killer had gotten Amy's phone number. Amy and Kristen Sabo had started a babysitter business that year. They handed out flyers throughout the village. Both of their names and home phone numbers were printed on the flyers, but that would not explain how multiple other girls also got phone calls from the man, and also didn't explain why Kristen did not.
Less than 2 years after Amy was killed, her parents Mark and Margaret got divorced. They were already having problems in their marriage, and Amy's death made it impossible for them to work through their issues. Eventually, Margaret moved to Las Vegas to be close to her mom. In September of 2001, her mother did not hear from her for 2 weeks. Then, on September 29th, she stopped by her apartment, but she did not have a key. She called the police, who broke down the door and found Margaret's body. She had been dead for several days. She was 54 years old when she died. She was already having issues with alcohol before Amy was murdered. Those issues got much worse after her murder. She was buried next to her daughter. Now, mother and daughter are together in the 2 plots where Margaret and Mark were supposed to have been buried. In 2002, police thought they had caught a break in the case, when a man burst into St. Angela's Church in Fairview Park, Ohio, right before communion. He screamed, quote, "May I have your attention, please? My name is Richard Allen Fulbert. People know me as Satan. I killed Amy Mihaljevic," end quote. 2 off-duty officers were attending the service at the church that day. They quickly grabbed the man and placed him in handcuffs. Police figured out his name was indeed Richard Allen Fulbert, as he had said, and he was a 42-year-old schizophrenic who had been off of his meds for several weeks. Police quickly ruled him out as a suspect. Richard went on to write a book called Buy the Truth, Do Not Sell It. He discusses Amy's case throughout the book. In 2005, Richard was still saying he killed Amy. He was also saying Hillary Clinton was the Antichrist. Former FBI Special Agent Gary Belluomini said, quote, "He was just a nut. We had a lot of people like that," end quote.
None of the other 3 or more girls who received phone calls from an unknown man asking them to go shopping with him back in 1989 fell for his trick. In 2005, a retired FBI agent interviewed 3 of the girls. In the interview with the first girl, he asked her if she had ever taken a trip to the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center in Bay Village. It was a place Amy had loved going to. The girl told him that she had been there at some point in the previous few weeks before Amy was murdered. He met with the second girl, and he asked her the same question. She said she had also been to the center in the previous few weeks before Amy's murder. He met with the third girl, who also confirmed she had been at the center not too long before Amy's murder. He also asked each girl if they remember signing their name and number in the guest book by the front doors. At least 2 of the girls said yes. They did remember doing that. The problem was, when the police went to the Science Center to ask about the book, they found out the book was missing.
James Renner, who has written extensively about Amy's case, said he was contacted by a man named Tony Pershinsky, who told him police investigating Amy's case were looking into a man by the name of Dean Runkle, who had been his 8th grade science teacher. Tony said, quote, "And here's the weird thing. He used to tell us about the science center he volunteered at, and I realized the nature center was in Bay Village," end quote. James was able to figure out that Dean grew up just a few miles from where Amy's body was found along County Road 1181. The spot where her body was found is in the middle of nowhere, with no major highway within about 30 miles. Police have long believed the killer had to have known the area well.
James emailed hundreds of Dean's former students. One of those was a woman by the name of Kim Rayburn, who said, quote, "He would stare at me in class. It was more than creepy. It felt like an animal noticing you walk into a room. He had a few girls he was extra close to, like the one who sat in front of me. I'd watch him put his left hand on her back and bend down to whisper in her ear. It seems inappropriate now, the way he treated some of the girls," end quote. Another former student, Christina Adkins, said that in 1994 she heard Dean talking to another teacher about an 8th grader who had gotten pregnant. They were trying to decide which boy might be the father when Christina said, Dean said, quote, "Wish it was me," end quote. She said, quote, "He's one of those men who makes you feel uncomfortable when you're alone with them. He made comments about girls' outfits. I remember when he saw one girl with a skirt that was way too short. He said, 'That's not appropriate, but I'm glad you wore it to my class.' In lab, he would stand behind me and push his chest against me. He was very touchy," end quote. On June 23, 2016, a press conference was held in Bay Village. At the press conference, investigators announced they had never released evidence to show to the public from Amy's case. This evidence was a pea green blanket and a pea green handmade curtain that had been found in the field not too far away from Amy's body. On both of these items, they found canine hairs that were a match with Amy's dog Jake. They had saved hair from Jake for all of those years. Police said they were assuming Amy's clothes had Jake's hair on them when she was abducted, and the hairs had transferred from her clothes to these 2 items. Their assumption was that these items were probably at the location where she was murdered. Then she was wrapped in the items and moved to the field where she was found. Then, the murderer had taken them and tossed them in the field away from her body. Of course, you may be wondering, why did the police not release this information years earlier in the case? Someone may have recognized these rather distinct-looking items. According to True Crime Garage, police had gathered several bags of evidence in the field all around Amy's body, and they had no idea if any of it had anything to do with Amy's murder, including these two items. It took them many years before they figured out, through Jake's hair, that these items were important to Amy's case. Also, the blanket and curtain were not found right next to Amy's body. They may have been found as far as 100 yards from her body.
Police do have DNA. They found 3 hairs from white men on the blanket and curtain. Police said if they test the DNA, then that evidence will be destroyed. Mark Spetzel said, quote, "When you think of DNA today, you think of nuclear DNA. You think of blood and you think of what you can do with that blood. You can get a profile from that DNA. You can put it into a database, and if the person is in the database, you're going to connect. We don't have that kind of DNA. So our DNA does not lend itself to be put into a database for a comparison against a known population. So if we're going to be doing anything, we have to develop a suspect and then try to do a comparison on the back end of that kind of thing. We're hoping that in the future, there will be some test with our DNA that we can do a test and create that. But right now, we're not there. In the process of analyzing DNA, you use up that DNA and it's gone. So you have to be very careful of when you pick and choose what you're going to do." End quote. Police have interviewed thousands of people through the years, and they still get people calling in tips on this case to this day. They're still waiting for that one phone call that could help them solve this case. Mark Spetzel retired as chief of police for Bay Village in 2020. After that, he was elected mayor of Avon Lake, Ohio, a job he holds to this day. Amy's best friend, Christy Sabo, did many interviews about the case through the years and kept hoping Amy's case would be solved. She got married and had 3 kids. On May 1st of 2023, she passed away suddenly. No cause of death has been released. Jason Mihaljevic is now married with kids of his own. He still lives in Ohio, although not in Bay Village. He said what happened to his sister actually helps him as a father. He said, quote, "It makes me a better father. It makes me realize my time with my kids is vital, and I'm not going to give it up for the world." End quote. We've now reached the portion in the video where we're going to share our own thoughts and opinions on this case, starting with Heather.
I think the former 8th grade science teacher, Dean Runkle, is the most likely suspect.
It does seem to be that way. James Renner presents a very strong case against Runkle in multiple articles and even in a book that he wrote about this case. Seems like a very strong suspect, but he has not been charged. I think this is one of those cases where until they get a definite match on DNA, there aren't going to be any charges just because there's not enough there on anybody. It's circumstantial. It's been so long since this happened, it's just hard to put this case together. Plus, there are hundreds of other potential suspects. We're not sure who the police have completely ruled out and who they're still looking at in this case. Of course, for the sake of surviving family members and friends of Amy, we hope that this will be solved soon, and we're going to put some information down there below for who you can contact if you know anything. Police always say this, if you know anything at all, even if it doesn't seem like something important to you in this case, well, it might be important to them. So please pass that information along to the police here, and we want to see this case solved. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.